So, with that, it is my great pleasure to introduce Puja Vaish, the first speaker of the day. Puja is an artist, curator, and educator, currently serving as the director of the Jahangir Nicholson Art Foundation at the CSMVS Museum in Mumbai. She specializes in modern and contemporary art and has developed several significant exhibitions. Her curatorial work includes the show Nasreen Mohammadi, The Vastness Again and Again, which offered fresh perspectives on Mohammadi's artistic legacy. Out of Place, Har Jagah Ajnabi from 2023, which examined notions of place through 33 Indian artists' works. And The Fragility of Time from 2024, the first ever presentation contextualizing Nalini Malani's early works. For the museum's centenary, she curated Ancestors Sahaj Rahal in 2022 and most recently presented Photo Lies featuring Dayanita Singh's works. Previously serving as a curator at the Dr. Bhaudaji Lad Museum, also in Mumbai, Vaish worked extensively with colonial era collections, contributed research to the museum's publications, and co-curated Connecting Threads, Textile in Contemporary Practice in 2019. Her academic career includes teaching positions at MSU Baroda in the Faculty of Fine Arts, at the Delhi College of Art, and the Kamla Raheja Vidyanidhi Institute of Architecture in Mumbai. Vaish holds master's and bachelor's degrees from MSU Baroda, where she received the gold medal and the Nasreen Mohammadi Award. Welcome, Puja.
Ratan, for that very generous and long introduction. Also thank you to Prateek, Priyanka, Joshua, Ohan, Aditi, and the entire Experimenter team for having me here. I'm really honored actually to be here, and it's been a really stimulating day yesterday to hear from so many colleagues. So I'd like to begin by sharing how I came to curating, as it was an oblique path. I began my career, as you heard from Ratan, as an artist, and alongside my practice for about 7 years, I also taught at colleges of art in Baroda, Delhi, and in Mumbai. So I was engaged both in practice and theory simultaneously, and I got really interested in the narratives around art practice actually, and the institutional roles in sort of shaping these narratives. And this transition to a curator has really helped me see things from the other side really, and also to bring in artist perspectives into exhibition making. I think what I value really as a curator is this opportunity for collaborative work, and also the deep research into incredibly varied contexts and practices. I've actually been really fortunate to have had the chance to work at, develop my curatorial work at two of the most dynamic Indian museums, which have redefined the sort of curatorial role in historical museums in India. Both these museums are actually tourist sites in Mumbai, both for colonial institutions, but about 50 years apart. So actually these museums were not really set up to accommodate the contemporary, and these have been recent sort of initiatives and introductions. So I actually began working at the Dr. Bhaudaji Lad Museum, which was formerly the Victoria and Albert Museum, which you see on the left. And I'm now working at the Jahangir Nicholson Art Foundation, which forms the modern and contemporary wing of the Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj Vastu Sangrahalaya, which was formerly the Prince of Wales Museum. So the JNAF actually, it's interesting because it's a separate organization with a dedicated gallery which was created within the museum through our partnership. And so in a sense, it's an institution within an institution, and I think that kind of objective distance has given the opportunity to really further play within the museum's own context. So I'll outline certain questions that I've explored in my curatorial projects. So I think as one enters the museum, I like looking at it as going through different portals of time, place, and context. So speaking from the space of the contemporary, I was wondering how we can sort of create this porosity between these different spaces in a sense to offer a more meaningful engagement with these different spaces, a more connected engagement, as well as like a more critical a critical way of looking and often addressing difficult histories that exist in these collections. Because as you know, many of these museums were actually set up in the colonial period. And many collections have several stories that have a lot of potential to be reread, reframed. So yeah, and also how to connect those kind of things to how we think in the present. Second, how can we demystify art legacies by looking into art processes and the connected networks and environment that they both grow out of and reflect. So in a sense, to look beyond the celebratory or beyond the oratic in practices, even while presenting very celebrated artists, in order to approach these practices from other frameworks than the given. Third, how can underrepresented stories and micro-histories serve as tools of intervention in museum practice, and also expanding the scope of art history, and more importantly in how we sort of view ourselves and the world. So these are the three, I've divided my presentation into three sort of sections, and I'm going to show you first a couple of contemporary art exhibitions that we've done in the space. Also an exhibition on an artist who was working between the 50s and 60s, Nasreen Mohammadi, as well as an exhibition that is derived out of a very random discovery in the JNF collection. So one of the fascinating possibilities of working in a history museum is staging contemporary art within it. And the BDL Museum has actually been a pioneer in that respect, where I was also working earlier. But here at the CSMVS, we have a separate gallery for modern and contemporary art, which is the JNF. And typically one could sort of keep these things very separate. But I think perhaps there's some scope for creating mischief within those, these set things in order to bring in these other ways of looking. So for certain projects like this, where we presented Dayanita Singh's work, which is actually now not most recently because we've had 2 other exhibitions after that. Yeah, so the main work, like the main body of work, was of course presented in our gallery, which was a focus display. But then I'd also invited Dayanita to sort of consider interventions into other spaces in the gallery. And actually we're very, I work in quite an enabling space, because even the museum director is quite open, to these ideas. And also how to meaningfully do this, right? Because you already have a set display, and within that there's no wall space, so you have to really do it in a sense that both kind of play off each other. So on the left is actually the Natural History Gallery. It's interesting because there are these taxidermy displays from almost 100 years ago. And as you know, taxidermy was sort of a colonial practice. It was sort of a way of documenting the wildlife of the country through this colonial lens. So, but positioned in the center of this, we have the Dayanita Singh's, which she created specially for these spaces. So this is the wildlife of India pillar where she's dug into her archive of earlier past works that she had made. And interestingly, these are not only taken in museums, though they are, some of them are, and one of the photographs in fact is from this museum but earlier, but also from homes and collections. So what happens, I think, in these is that because there's this set, it's a framed sort of thing, that window that you're looking into, it creates a kind of very surreal tableau where you'll see a lion walking in a room, or you can read it in alternate ways, or you have these trophy heads that are coming out of the wall. But I think then presenting it alongside the wildlife, this taxidermy display also brings in other narratives around the idea of preservation itself, from systems of research to also looking at systems of, say, ornamentation, wonder, violence, and also sport. So on the right is the textile gallery, and here again she drew from an archive of a project that she'd done documenting the Parsi community in Bombay from the early 2000s. So now also the context for her, how you look at her own work changes here, because it derived out of something else. It also includes photographs of a few other people other families in Mumbai beyond the Parsi community as well. But what happens here is, because it's placed in the textile gallery, and she of course calls it Sari Museum, the focus becomes the women and what they are wearing, sort of. And so I think and the textile gallery is interesting because it has this whole, it shows you the regional craftsmanship from different regions in India. And so it becomes from this sense of craftsmanship and production to the ultimate consumer, and also like the sort of performative aspect of attires as performative of identities, of communities, class, caste, gender, and so forth. Yeah, one second. So I think while in this case the exhibition grew out of our gallery and extended into these other spaces, I'll now speak about the next project, which is a much younger contemporary artist, Sahej Rahal, which was entirely developed it was an exhibition that I had to think about for the museum centenary. So I thought it would be interesting to stage a very contemporary intervention within our gallery and maybe other spaces as well, but really thinking through the museum's context to develop this exhibition. And so I'd invited Sahej Rahal, and I'm just showing you this existing sort of displays that were there earlier. Now this whole gallery is also being reimagined in the museum, the Ancient World Gallery. But this was from the archaeology section, and it's quite interesting. I'll just speak quickly about the three things you see on the slide. On the top you have it's kind of also amusing, but it's like a fictional panel that was painted and several years ago. It's been there at least from the 70s, if not before, and it accompanied the museum's hand axes and the archaeological weapons that were found. So this is a fictionalized narrative that has been created by an artist as an explanatory panel that went alongside this. So here he's merged two times where you have the evolutionary stages, two different times about to be engaged in battle. No prizes for guessing who will win that. Below that you have this other a tableau relief, which just shows you the different stratas of the earth where you may find the different eras of archaeological finds. And the right is actually an actual object from the collection, which was from a very important site in Maharashtra called Inamgaon, where which is actually, I'll go into that later, but this is a child burial from that. And it was like a post-Harappan site. For this project, actually we had a lot of time because I was thinking about this through the lockdown. So there were many people I thought of first of who could do this, even group kind of interventions, and finally I thought Sej would be a really apt choice because he was already working with these ideas of archaeology, and actually he'd been to this site in Anamgaon. And this site is actually quite interesting because it's at the center of debate with archaeologists, and there are several theories. Because one burial urn is actually completely different from all the others that were found. So you can imagine there's like, archaeologists saying that maybe it's someone from outside, maybe it was a chief of the place, or what it could be. So, so developing from that kind of speculative nature of archaeology, he drew his own. So that's actually a reference slide, and next to that is the pottery urns that Sej drew, created out of it. And his practice is quite interesting because it combines video games and pottery, like sculpture, painting, even artificial intelligence, video. And so drawing from this sort of fictionalized narrative, he created his completely like his own fiction story, which is of a like a post-human civilization that's come and gone, is extinct, and has left this large materiality, like a whole material to be deciphered as to the origins and the decline of this. Oh, sorry, this was. So this is what the exhibition sort of looked like. We also designed it as like a archaeological crypt or something. There was a weird looking skeleton painted golden with protrusions and things in the center of it, and also like a museum holding site. And I'd also selected several objects that he had made for the Kochi Biennale much earlier, which is where I first encountered his work, and it really left a lasting impression. So he makes these sort of objects that look sort of prehistoric. So you'll have these kind of heads and things, lots of objects, also kind of futuristic, sometimes very Darth Vaderish, So this was actually the thing. And interestingly, for this exhibition, so it was like really a collaboration with the artists, with the institution, with looking into their, like researching the archaeology section more, because this was, what he was drawing from, and also collaboration with the audience, because we decided not to put any labels in the show. Though the way we put these together, and it was a very collaborative sort of way of also designing the show, because it didn't matter what we put where, but there's this sort of mock seriousness to the way things have been displayed like this. And so we really invited people, and people coming to the museum are so used to sort of before even trying to look, maybe sometimes you're reading the labels and then kind of seeing it through that. So here, and it was a really kind of hit activity where people were actually coming, where can we write labels for the museum? And we did several programs, and there were some very interesting stories that people wrote, like I'm trying to think. So like one was that the human race was wiped out, and later on they were found with masks, and there were many theories about how this cultural significance of the mask, it's ritualistic or what it could be, or the fact that a skeleton was dug out in an archaeological expedition, and also a deadly virus was unearthed, and sort of that caused the extinction. So it was really to build these stories and see what drives the consciousness, what drives people's consciousness, which comes not only from what we read, like what we know, but also literature, popular cinema, like maybe The Mummy, or like so many other things that sort of, play into it. So the exhibition was really created as a space for conversation on the role and existence of the museum by picking through museology, this act of actually making a museum, telling the stories, and that could be read as a subjective sort of act of history writing. And several programs that we did through it also, we did conversations with authors like Tony Joseph, who's written a book called Early Indians, which talks about the political nature of archaeology, and that kind of reading into who came first and who's the oldest civilization, and sometimes facts get completely twisted into telling that narrative. So I'll move to the next part of my presentation. Okay, so next I'm going to talk about Nasreen Mohammadi's show. So I think this Nasreen Mohammadi's case is particularly intriguing because a mystery surrounds her life and work since she rose to prominence much after her death. And I felt like the austerity in her work with these stark lines and all, and the isolated events that were known about her had somehow conjured a whole mythology of her as a sort of recluse who only wore white, a single woman who was defined by pathos, solitary genius, as if her art sort of arose from a vacuum. So in this exhibition, I really wanted to sort of look, while it presented several works, like several unseen works, I really wanted to look at her other networks and sort of situate her both as a teacher and as an artist through her peer affiliations, because as an artist, so much of this is like through conversation. And so I also included, and also I collected this through oral stories and people who knew her. Here you can like see her as a very collegial person. Also, I hardly found pictures of her in white. So really, I'll move to the next now. I also did this like where I juxtaposed works of her peer groups to kind of see this. So that's Nalini, that's Nasreen, before was Jairam and Nasreen. So I'll now move to the last part of my presentation. So this is really about a story of very recently, about 2 years ago. I was looking at this strange kind of object, really nondescript 6-inch by 6-inch tile that we had in our collection, and it was like it uncovered a whole new area of research. And then let's go to this. Yeah, so this was the object that I started with, and it was really one of the most underwhelming objects because we have several other great works in the collection. But it was from this, as I started digging further, and also came across a whole other collection, someone else's collection of these tiles. And the backs of the tiles gave us a lot of information, and we started digging further and found several clues that then put this story together. So just to give you a background, it was a radical design initiative called the Vitram Studio, which emerged in the 1950s. And this exhibition kind of compiled the works from this studio. Also, the story is interesting because it was a Jewish refugee from Poland who escaped the World War II and came to Bombay, established this glass making factory. And as an offshoot of this glass making factory, he also started a studio which employed artists at a time when there were barely any galleries or any other networks existing. And to create really, it provided them infrastructure, as also these kind of high quality glazes and glass pieces to make glass mosaics. So it was kind of between design, it was a radical design initiative. And they would also, to make objects, decor objects and affordable art. And also they would advertise for building decor. So, I mean, as we started digging, also found from different sources. This was just to give you, and a whole many other artists who've not really been documented yet, right? Who were working at that time. So interestingly, one of the chief artists, Badri Narayan, who's also kind of not spoken about as much in modern art, had when I started looking into things that he had written several articles on art, and one of the things that he had written about was how this could have been a springboard for a sustained public art movement, because several murals were actually commissioned all over Bombay. Here you see, we went looking for them, some were not there, some we found archival images of. Also he spoke about Charles Correa, who had commissioned this from like K.G. Subramaniam and Badri Narayan for the Gandhi Darshan in Delhi. So it really took me into looking at public art. Our team went all over searching for these murals, and some of these still exist. And I found that Vitram also created through Vitram a mural in Calcutta was also created, which I hope to go. I know nothing about it actually, but if anyone does, like who the artist is or anything, but really to look at this idea of this, this time of modern art within modernity with these kind of idealistic progressive ideas, because Badri Narayan, because Badri Narayan also, he referenced in his writing the Mexican muralist movement and also the US federal art projects. So that kind of idealism, and it's also time then the cities were being built. So, the idea of urbanism, how do we think of cities, how do we think of public space, and those kind of conversations, design and art. And so yeah, I mean, what else? So yeah, I think in this, the other thing I wanted to be careful of, so in most of my exhibitions that I do, there are many sort of subtext that when you go you'll see there'll be archival displays, stories that sort of grow out of this. And the idea was not really to make a case for public art, because the kind of thing that Badri Narayan spoke about really came out of this idealism of the time as a new sort of nation, newly independent nation. But we know what the state's idea of public art can be. Like in Bombay, it's mermaids and these twisted bodies in yoga poses. Probably here it's something else. But really to sort of spark a conversation, and we try and do that a lot through our exhibitions. The exhibition actually really comes into gets life with the audiences, with the sort of walkthroughs that we do, and very sort of thought through programs to spark these kind of conversations. So starting from this tile by Viju Sadvelkar, we reached this. So there's also this archival display that is there. So I think in the end, if I have to look back, I think for me, what's important is to sort of expand the way we look at things, to sort of bring in a multifocality, into discourse and exhibitions. And also one other thing I'd like to say quickly, if I have 2 minutes, also like working with constraints. Everyone works with constraints in any sort of capacity that you may work with a big institution, with a small space. For us, we are not a very large space because we're literally just one, though we call ourselves modern and contemporary wing of the museum. It's not really a wing, but it's a gallery. And so how to turn constraints into strengths, because I feel even artistic practice is like that, right? No artists also work through things, and new kind of imaginations are created out of that. And so like for instance, if there's a small space, perhaps it gives you the opportunity to really present tightly curated ideas within it. We deal with self-censorship all the time, being in a public space and being in India, most people would know. So really, initially as an artist, I would question these things, that why can't we say some really political things, or So I feel the way to do that is also through subversion. So even the self-censorship, how do we change that to actually be able to have these conversations, right? Without compromising on the display. So the way we do it maybe is through changing how we really write about it or what we do. And yeah, so I think public engagement is something that I really value also at this institution, because it's a given for us, as opposed to if we were existing somewhere outside, because we are in this museum space. So I think I'll end here. Thank you. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Puja. Maybe just to continue that, if you want to talk a bit about, oh, this is great to have another picture of the Badri work. But,
I just put in slides of other things that we've done. Yeah.
Thank you.
This is part of the exhibition.
Maybe to continue on that thread that you left off about the self-censorship and subversion, the kind of tension that you experience in a place like this. I think what's really potent in your context is this coming together of a really public institution, maybe not a state institution, but a really public institution, and this interest that you have developed in this program in what we might call, for the lack of a better word, outliers, both in terms of certain canons about history, but also works and narratives within canonical histories that have not really been researched. And so in that situation, that you're able to bring a very large audience to work that has perhaps not even necessarily been historicized or theorized in any extensive way, how do you kind of mediate that? What are the ways in which you're able to create and make those subversive claims and address actually these very different publics that you're speaking to? Because at one level, it is also a public of artists, curators, art historians who have read these artists or not read these artists in certain ways. But there's also really busloads of people who come to CSMVS every single day as part of their Mumbai itinerary, right? And I think this is an interesting kind of tension, but also an opportunity, but has many parallels with similar kind of encyclopedic 19th century museum structures that are now by force or by necessity dealing with the so-called contemporary. So just to maybe continue to elucidate that point.
So the first part of your question, it's nice that people think that, we're trying to break canons or something. And so I don't really go into thinking about, that's not the start point to take some canon and break it or blast it or do whatever. But really, it's through research what comes up, and I think it's really about what, like for instance, for Nasreen Mohammadi, you'll see lots of pictures of her in white if you Google her, actually. But what I'm saying is that you would actually see several others if you have researched all these, of like other photographs. She's smiling, she's like, she's doing her thing, So it's also what you really focus on, or if there's something that doesn't sort of fit in, rather. Sometimes it's just about digging a little further, because it's a different point of view that maybe is not spoken about. See, this is Nalini's thing, and this was completely a different one that actually arose from Nasreen's exhibition, because Nalini had seen Nasreen's exhibition and she was also one of the people I'd interviewed for it. And again, for her, she got, this was the first time that she was ready to show her earlier work, her past life as this amazing abstractionist. So I think that was what was really nice for me, that I feel she also got a chance that, okay, it can be presented to contextualize it in a larger way. About publics and audiences, like I said, that for instance, at the museum, we cannot really take a stand against like government stands or say like anti this thing. Any matters of sub judice are not sort of allowed to be featured. I feel galleries that we have a little more, leeway, Pratik. But even then, everywhere. And at the museum, actually, you just don't know, these are not people. There are of course lots of art-oriented, initiated people, artists and all who are sympathetic or whatever. But you have to realize that you're dealing with polarized audiences, especially in India right now, what the scenario is. And how do you also address them? It's not to, how do we find a way to speak about something in another way that could probably, change something, hopefully, but leave some impression. So I think that's what has been a learning for me to kind of how to put things together. And that's why a lot of it comes out through talks, through the kind of programming that we do, yeah.
And there's a very strong thread which I think even runs through from yesterday, this idea of demystification, that you use that term as well, and to think about ways in which these histories can be spoken about and presented in ways that appeal to perception, that appeal to other registers of comprehension that are not necessarily couched in a certain kind of vocabulary. But I also want to maybe ask you to talk a bit more about your approach to the Jahangir Nicholson collection itself. I think the last exhibition, the most recent exhibition, is a really interesting example of how a kind of literal fragment of something in the collection became the basis for research, but indeed the collection itself is a kind of substantial holding of a certain 20th century
As you're
history.
saying that this was a exhibition derived completely from the collection.
Yeah, so let's hear a bit more about your approach to that as perhaps one of your first responsibilities as the director and curator of this foundation.
So I think we have a collection of about 800 or so art pieces, and it really it kind of covers the period between mainly the 70s, 80s, and up till the 2000s actually. So for me it's been interesting because of this reason. I studied in art college and everything, but I feel it's really in collections that you sometimes find, I think several private collections, there's like history out there that you just won't know. Even one work could unlock, or what we know even about artists, or how we kind of look at that time. Because a lot of art history was written also in that time, so you have to kind of keep revisiting it to reframe it. And there's so many works that will kind of, change that view. And so for me, exhibition building also, and actually about the Jahangir Nicholson, it's interesting because again we are very enabling sort of, trustees and board. And so for instance, for this exhibition, it was really a leap of faith that they took with me with this proposal, because it was like, this is not such a young artist, not from our collection, what is, AI and crazy things like skeletons, and so it was really like, also kind of changing that within the organization of what we present, not only from the collection, but several other exhibitions have grown, like with entirely works from outside, or in this last exhibition is just one object, and then, we've borrowed most of the other works.
And maybe a last question from me, and then we will open it up to the room. I'm curious, we talked a bit about this when we had our chat earlier as well, about this very unique trajectory that you've had and the possibility of working in these two public historical colonial museums, and the insertion of the contemporary, and this is maybe following up a bit from the last question, but I'm curious to hear about ways in which that can be a kind of double-edged sword in this situation. I think the insertion of the contemporary is both a way to critique, as you said, some of the problematic histories, but it's also sometimes a kind of instrumentalization or flattening of those histories. I'm curious also about the title of Dayanita's exhibition, Photo Lies, when you put them also in places that are galleries that speak or lay out certain histories. So just to speculate on that relationship between the historical and the contemporary as an irritant, but also as something that I think might, in certain cases, evade or not necessarily underscore successfully the problematics of the historical collections and structures that these museums are built on.
So you're saying that sometimes you're not able to address those histories, if I get your question correct.
Well, that I think this is again something that I see a lot of museums around the world doing. You know, the National Gallery in London.
And
there's
not
many.
new for sure,
and the kind of the motivations for bringing contemporary interventions into historical and often colonial museum structures are varied, and I think in India, and particularly in these two museums that you've spoken about, and perhaps you want to go back to Bhada Jilad as an example, because we haven't heard so much about those projects, to think about how it's functioned as a critical tool, but also what are some of the ways in which there are elisions, or there are there is a kind of shifting there's a kind of shifting lens towards thinking about the spectacular, the intervention, but actually taking away from the structures that these museums are actually built on and what they're trying to portray.
Yeah, so like I said, I think the BDL Museum has really been a pioneer in that, with inviting contemporary artists. And interestingly, their collection is much, the museum is much older. It was built, I think, in the 1850s. And the collection is really mostly a colonial collection, which was industrial arts and decorative arts. And several artists have been invited to really look at that. So that is the main exhibition, right? And I think that is the main exhibition. And there are like about 3 rooms upstairs, which are really focused on that, but also interventional displays. And there I had co-curated with the museum's director an exhibition called Connecting Threads, which was interesting because we had decided to do the exhibition on textile, and the museum had these amazing folios, the Watson's folios, which have again a very difficult history because it was about the sort of cotton trade and also into textiles, the whole Swadeshi movement. And Watson's was actually trying to take the, had all these samples that was then sent to Manchester to sort of produce them, mass produce them, as opposed to handmade and sell it back. So it had those kind of things in the collection, as well as like actual textile pieces. And then the interventions that were done there were, I think we chose about 13 or 17 artists. I think Paula, she's in the room, she was one of the artists who we had also chosen there. And so it was really sort of, all over the museum and with that. At the JNF, because we are already a contemporary, modern and contemporary exhibition space. So, I think I lost your last part of your question.
No, it's maybe the photo lies is what I was interested in hearing.
Actually we went through many titles, and if you've seen Dayanita's practice, she is also very, there is a sense to kind of provoke and change the way one is looking at photography, which then comes off the walls and does that. So everywhere it was about creating those kind of fictions also. And actually most of this work was her recent work. which was, she started this new thing of photo montage, where she's taken her own photos and combined kind of two architectures from very different time periods and very famous architects, sometimes an archaeological site. But the way she's put them together, you have to like go close, and it's all hand cut and put together. So when you see that scene, you realize that it's actually not, and it's in a way an impossible Escher's kind of space, but from far you don't really see that. So actually the title came out from the main show, which was in the JNF, like the more focus that was there, which was about these montages. And then these interventions, of course, because you know, these photos when they are framed, for me I feel like, you know, they look so surreal, some of them. So there's all that play between building your own story, and because they are in series, that story can be different for different people, what you're connecting and how you're seeing it.
Yeah.
So I think it kind of worked like that, and it was really provocative.
Yeah.
It was meant to provoke these questions, I guess.
And I guess there's a great metaphor there about the museum as a kind of montage
Yeah,
as well.
Yeah,
but let's open it up to the room. Questions. There's a question from this side.
So Puja, you're an artist first before you became a curator.
Introduce yourself, please.
Oh, I'm Saloni Doshi from Bombay. I run Space 118 Art Foundation. Okay, so you were sitting in a colonial building with a modern art collection. I was pleasantly surprised to see that you very slowly and steadily, instead of just showing the collection, which is usually the focus of most collectors in India and abroad, you started including contemporary art with a heavily modern collection. And in this building and this context, also given the fact that you worked at Baudaji Lad and did several shows in that context, how was the response? I remember last year at a dinner and 3 people said, we have Vitram tiles and artworks from there. What has been the reaction? Because a lot of your work is based on your own research of the collection, finding these unique things, as well as seeing audiences' responses to them. Because the collection has already been seen before. And I think that's another thing. I feel it's a fallacy that most people believe that one should want to only see the collector's collection. You've actually defeated those views of us wanting to see Nicholson's collection. You place one work of his and probably have other works. And I think in Dayanita's case, I don't think you bought Dayanita. Exactly. So how do you, what, is there a role you juggle with the people who, the trustees who run the foundation, or the museum in itself, or how do you play this role as a curator? Because I find it's not easy to do this.
So I think what's really reassuring for me is that I feel like there's been a growing new regular audience, you know, so that's really reassuring also. With the trustees, like I told you, they have taken certain real leaps of faith with me, and I'm really grateful for that. But also I think just it's like, for instance, now Vitram, it sparked from this one object, or say even Nasreen, we had 1 or 2 only from our collection, but or say Nalini. So we actually had a work of Nalini's, a very abstract work of Nalini's, which was almost similar, like you may have mistaken it for a Gaitonde work, you know. So we have several works of Nalini's, but we also had one of those and other oil paintings of hers. So I feel like rather than for me to put up an exhibition where I say took all of Nalini's works and from the collection, I feel it gives the collection also a little further meaning when it is about her practice from the 60s and 70s along with other things. Then it kind of becomes a different node, you know. Then you're just shifting the lens from the collection to from the practice. So I think that's it, and I think our trustees have been very, very supportive and enabling. Yeah. But yeah, of course it's been work, it's been me making several sort of presentations and like, to be able to convince, and they have some very good questions because my trustees are not from the art world. So, yeah. One is a businessman and one is a lawyer. But very interestingly, just a side note for this collection, I find it fascinating the kind of philanthropic role that they have also taken. Because see, the main collector is no more, right? So Nicholson is no more. The JNF has been founded after he passed away. And Nicholson was someone who he wanted to build a museum of contemporary art in Mumbai. We also have those letters that he's written to the governor and all of that, talking about this desire. And his desire was to make the collection public. But he passed away. And then he entrusted this to these two trustees. One was his godson and one was part of his lawyer's team, I think. And so to actually realize that dream of someone who is no more, and to make that kind of go have these meetings with the museum, make this kind of alliance, where the museum has also, and they presented it to the museum saying that, see, the collection ends at early 1900s. Here now with the collection, we can sort of take it forward till the contemporary. And so it's a very unique kind of, and some initially it does also have some also friction sometimes, but overall it's a very interesting sort of model. It's like really, we are really an institution within another institution. It's so I think it's unique in that way. And the infrastructure support that I have because of being in the museum is also amazing, because we don't have separate conservators. My team is like really small actually. They're just 4 people. There's me, there's one other person who works with me, and we have one designer who works remotely. And interestingly, there is someone who worked in Nicholson's house for many years, and he has an oral knowledge of the collection just by being there. He can't write emails or do any of that, but he knows each and every piece, and he can also recognize artists through our collection, show him any artists of the modern and contemporary period. So it's another way of pedagogy, learning. One doesn't need specializations and super specializations to be in this field, I think. Yeah, I wasn't specialized to be a curator. I was really on my way to be an artist.
Other question, there's another question there. Great. Yes.
Actually, we have shifted from there to here.
Yes. Can we collect a couple? Yeah, because... Yes, thank you.
Sure.
Stand up and say your name to the camera.
Hi, my name is Ajay. I come from Nayab. I have come from Delhi. Thanks so much, Experiment, for putting all of us together. Puja, it was really heartening to see, the background and the whole elements of, the past and bringing into the contemporary bit. One thing that has been kind of troubling me since yesterday, and I have been listening to people from around the globe, that when we are talking about art as a definition and expanding its boundaries, or talking about collectives and bringing in the new elements, what I wanted to check with you is, let's say specifically from your perspective, how strong, solid or perforated are the boundaries around the definition of art? And where I'm coming from is, we are fascinated about the heritage art forms and the traditional art forms. How strongly do you bifurcate them? And even when I see the images and your portray of some of the elements, either, as Ratan was talking about, they become relics and they come more from historical and political side, or they are just utilitarian elements of whatever the textiles. But do you treat these art forms as living art forms, not relics from the past, but actually real
Which art
stories.
forms we're talking about? Living traditions like
The heritage art forms, which traditionally would be
Okay.
called crafts, but it would have all the elements of even the wall arts from Gond to Patchitras to blah blah blah,
Yeah.
but even the other elements.
Yeah.
So
Thank you for that question. Actually,
Puja, we might hold a couple of questions.
okay, okay. Wait, who's the
Remember.
thread? Huh? Okay.
Hi Pooja, I'm Ria and I work in the commercial arts space. Thank you so much for such a fantastic presentation. I was just more interested to hear about your approach to interpretation and exhibition didactics. I thought it was fascinating that you chose not to have any, I guess, textual interpretation in Sehaj's show. And I was wondering whether your audience factors into that kind of decision making.
Priyanka, 2 is enough.
Should we do 2 and 2?
Yeah.
I think let's just do quicker responses maybe.
Yeah, I'm feeling like I'm in the spot more than just the light.
Okay, Paula's asking.
Hi, I'm Paula Sengupta.
Ask us.
Should I go?
Yeah, ask Paula.
So, mine is a comment rather than a question in response to Ratan's last intervention and in sort of support of Pooja's work. So, I just want to say, as somebody who works on all sides of the fence, that contemporary artists don't come out of nowhere. So it, essentially, it's a continuing organic process, and especially for us in India, our art history and points of reference go back a very, very long way. And as contemporary artists, we do constantly refer to this huge history and legacy that we have and choose to reference these things. So, for example, we have sort of antiquities like Sahej is referring to, but we also have these colonial museums of ethnography, taxidermy, and so on. And the Anita's dioramas are not coming out of nowhere. Mm-hmm. We have grown up with these legacies, and artists do reference them. Mm-hmm. Or, for example, I don't know if Kamini is here today, but a museum like MAP, and the very important women artists show that, I don't know if it's still up, but they opened with, for the first time I saw that contemporary artists, modern artists, traditional artists were all being placed together within a single exhibition space and meandering galleries, and they were not being separated chronologically, but being placed as points of reference for the continuing decades of artists who had probably referred to them. And my own work was in that exhibition, and for the first time I was happy to see that it was contextually placed in as part of a continuing history. So, I think, so these are very important, I think, aspects that when we are working in museum spaces, both as artists and curators, that we constantly look at and refer.
Thank you.
Thank you for that, Paula. Yeah. It's true, yeah. Okay, so fire first.
I think we will take the 2 questions.
Possibility that we take the questions, and during the Q&A at the end, we answer them because you have 2 minutes left.
Yes. You want to take one more, Puja?
No, okay.
I-
And then I just respond to whatever.
Yeah.
And then we'll see what time.
And then you'll have the last word. Yeah.
So my name is Vishal Khandelwal. I'm an architecture and art historian. So Pooja, thank you. This is such a rich presentation. I'm just going to add on to one of the questions asked. Could you just tell us a bit more about the process of your wonderful research? Where does your research take you? What are the repositories, kinds of sites? Maybe with reference to the Vitrum show, which is the most recent one. What are the places outside the museum that you go to do your research?
Like here in Cal, I hope to visit the UCO Bank,
Yeah.
possibly, and figure more about it. So that I'm going to do quick answers. But to answer your question about the indigenous art, actually, there was one exhibition that we did, which was not something I curated, but those are the kind of projects I'm also interested in. It's also playing, I don't know if one can kind of bring it up on screen. It's the one with the large Wadli map. And that was, again, a very interdisciplinary kind of project, because it was a collaboration with a college, with an architecture college, where I had also taught many years ago. Yeah, that one, this one. And I think it was fabulous because, I mean, I feel this need for us to kind of place, how to place folk within the contemporary has not really been resolved, and it's very tough to kind of resolve this issue, right? It's our need to feel good about ourselves, to be like, oh, we're placing contemporary art together with, but how is it really helping? And so I feel this project was very, like, I found it amazing because they had actually worked on, it was called A Forest in the City, living within Sanjay Gandhi National Park and RA Colony in Mumbai. And it started with a college inquiry into, it was a project that they were doing where they were looking at the marginalized of the city and the access to infrastructure of the city to the marginalized. And they chose this very interesting area called Sanjay Gandhi National Park, which is a sprawling forest within the biggest city in India, most congested city in India. So it's a very interesting thing from ideas of ecology and urbanism and those kind of things also. But they collaborated with communities living in the forest, which are actually not acknowledged. So you will find no map like that, but they actually created a map, which I don't know if it's here, but it was a satellite kind of map. And basically they were looking at the forest through different forms of representation, and that is what creates the definition of the forest. So they collaborated with communities, they collaborated with the NGOs, Pani Hak Samiti, like different representations. So one part of it was this kind of map making and different kinds of map making. That's it's called a Nazri Naksha, which is a hand-drawn map by the people who live there. The middle one is actually the one where they have identified these paras, the little settlements, which includes tribal and non-tribal, and the left is a state map. And obviously it's a constant conflict, right? And another part of it was a really beautiful, so this was one part about cartography itself, and the other part was this lots of objects of like documents, government decrees, forest official decrees, also things like, if you can move the slide once, I'll quickly do that. One can move the slide to the forest of claims. Anyway, there are these objects, So you also have here things of like the community that they have brought, even things like leopard poop, deer poop was in this exhibition. And that wide long map that you saw earlier. And also there's this Amazon box which the architects kind of sent to Dinesh, one of the Varli community artists who lived there. And what were the Amazon messages to reaching that box, reaching or not reaching. So many kinds of conversations which really brought the idea of the indigenous and all that from their space and from that idea. And there was a long 24-foot map, more like a drawing that was created by the architects. And in response to that, and also for me to justify this bringing into the a modern and contemporary art space, we sort of expanded the role of the Varli artists in this. Otherwise it was like an ethnographic display, which I thought still worked. But so then Dinesh, the Varli artist, also created in the gallery through the 2 months that long map in response, and that was his idea of this forest in the city. And that was alive with several stories. It gave specificities to like different parts of the forest, what it meant, protests, and there even those kind of stories were in his map with the BMC and so on, so forth. So really to bring out those conversations, really, than to impose it somewhere. Yeah.
Thank you, Puja.
Yeah,
And I know
sorry.
we'll come back. There's some questions that we
Yeah.
want to come back to later today. But thank you again. A
Thank
huge
you,
round of
thank you.
applause.
Thank you.